Welcome to Fast Pace, the new growth, leadership and management podcast featuring Josh Phegan and Dean Mackie. We wanted to peel back the layers on what happens in the world of fast-paced real estate agencies, from new leadership models to the management challenges we all face each day. This is about a new era in the estate agency sector. Rapid changes to business models, service lines, remuneration and growth present the greatest opportunities that we've ever seen. Sit back, get inspired, grow your skills, and reimagine what's possible with Fast Pace. Every Friday, wherever you get your podcasts, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Josh Phegan Digital. Dean, recently I was reading a book called The Big Finish, and it was an interesting story because it was all about, they say the most successful exits in business are about 15 years before they happen. And I started to think, well, how does that work? Like, you've hardly even got into the business and you're already thinking of exiting. What does that actually look like? But I kind of get the idea, because what they're really talking about is what does success actually look like later on down the track when you go to exit the business. So you're selling internally, externally, all of those things. Successful exits are a really important part. There's generational change that happens inside a business. There's equity events that happen inside of businesses. Sometimes people are in a position that they've got a life event that's actually occurred, unfortunately getting sick, or maybe there might be something like a divorce or something that's come on, which means that they can no longer be inside of that business going forward. What are some of the important things that you've got to pay attention to really get a successful exit inside of the residential real estate industry?
Thanks, Josh. Look, I think you are right. You've got to start with the end in mind, right? The problem is we'll go into this not thinking about how we're going to exit, and I think you've got to go into it, have that mind, because and also have a number of different ways to exit, because there might not be one single way to do so, and that's definitely what I've found over the years. You've mentioned all of those reasons why people might be, they might have an event that happens, or they might not really want to get out. They might want to do a merger, or so they might want to acquire a business, or part or full or gradual, and all of those things that you mentioned before. They've all got different reasons as to why someone's exiting.
And different urgency too, right?
Exactly. And therefore, each of those actually need to be treated differently. There can't be a one brush fits all on this, because, while you start with the exit in mind, and you will have a shareholders agreement that will talk about exit, right? Because when you go into a deal, you need to have that. And I would strongly urge you to have a really well-written documented process on how exit occurs and the obligations on each party and the timeframes things are going to take, the valuation formulas and all that stuff, right? Let's assume you've got all that, and that's a given. There's still, what I've found is when someone exits, typically you're still bespoking the solution, because it's different to, there's often circumstances surrounding that decision. So it's one of those things that, so I'd really say it depends on the goals of the individual exiting, and it's just not you. Sometimes you might have to consider your partners. And so, I've been going through a number of mergers recently, and so some of those examples, some people are staying in and some people are exiting, and some people want to adjust their equity positions, and often it's not until they get into the depths of that process that they actually start to realise what does it actually mean for them, because they haven't really thought about it,
And so sometimes people really tied at an ego level, and letting that go. This is my baby.
There's a big psychological part of it, right? So when people are exiting, there's a big psychological part that they have to go through to understand what they're letting go of and what does that actually really mean. But also, how do they articulate that to their people? Because sometimes if they articulate in a pretty poor way, it can disengage the team. But often, I find what holds successful exits up is really people understanding what's their tax position, what are the legals that go with it, and also not understanding how long those things take to get things documented, get the advice, get all parties to agree, to get to allow people to get finance and all that sort of stuff. There's so many complicated parts to this. So I find that, given for most people, it only happens once or twice in their life. They don't understand that, they underestimate it, and their expectations are often not met because they want it all to happen in 5 seconds, not realising that there's a number of things that have to be considered. So
that makes me think about that old saying that you should be building your business every day as though it could be sold. And that's like that whole idea. So the accounts are clean, you've got everything right. And this is a really interesting thing about getting the legacy right. Jim Collins would go to talk about a long and enduring company. Dean, my exit plan is death. Hopefully it doesn't happen on stage for you, but that's literally the exit plan in this particular business model. But in your business model, there's other things that are saleable entities and things that you're building as a part of that. Yeah, how important is it that people are clear about what an exit does look like? And it's actually okay to close a business too. You can actually walk away.
Sure.
No problems.
I mean, someone might just need to be closing it down and get out, and they might not have anyone inside their business that they can sell it to. It could be also poor performance or whatever. So there's lots of reasons for people to get out. But I think what my point is that you've probably got to be much more flexible than you think. Particularly if you're not getting rid of it all in one go. I mean, that's a whole different approach than if you're getting rid of it over time. So if you're selling the business down internally or your vendor financing a deal or whatever it is to make whatever you need to have happen, they're completely different things from each other. So having so making sure you've got a strategy that actually deals with your specific circumstances is really important. And I've seen, Josh, even internally for us over the years, I've learned some things that, if you don't have if you don't keep your balance sheet in order, for argument's sake, it can really stuff up a deal. It can really stuff up succession planning. So, for example, there's been times that I've had businesses where I've actually allowed people I've actually vendor financed people into a business, but it's sat as a loan against an asset. And then if somebody else wants to come in to try and explain how that works, when you can't necessarily extend the same to them, and the fact that you've got them paying, in this particular case, we agreed to pay interest to cover their loan because they couldn't afford to cover the interest. You create these legacies that sometimes can become quite messy on your balance sheet, and then equally, making sure you've got if you're putting money into to keep the business going, and the business owes you money, right? How you deal with that on exit is quite important. So I've learned there's some ways in which that you need to tidy that stuff up and keep things as clean as possible, because you might not realize if you had a business for 10, 20, 30, 40, some businesses have been going along and they've had their parents owned it and now the kids have got it, and you get in and you're starting to have a look and people are running their personal lives through their business and it's not clean books, so you can't really see the profitability and, it actually becomes quite difficult, right, to exit in a meaningful way, and nor does anybody want to buy into that if it's messy.
And this is a great conversation for a lot of people because they go through and they go, hang on a second, what am I actually going to sell in 5, 10 or 15 years? And so that's actually the conversation I have with people. Hey, you're buying your building, are you growing a property management asset? What actually makes the saleable intrinsic value of that business? And do you want it to be a long and enduring brand? And this is a really important conversation. Dean, how many brands have we seen that have come and gone in residential real estate? Like literally, and all of a sudden, but there are great brands that have stayed around for a long period of time. Now, this is actually an interesting thing is that, you have exits as business owners, you also have exits as CEOs. And one of the things that I've looked at, Howard Schultz out of Starbucks, Robert Igor out of Disney, there's a whole range of these types of guys who have exited the business and then had to come back in because the person they put in to run it couldn't run it. Then they had to go and take that over because there's no succession. So if you start to think, okay, you're starting today, day one, we're opening up a new business, we're going to go and call it Jones as opposed to Die Jones for 2 seconds. What do you think about straight away is an important consideration to get exits right from day one that people need to make sure they've got ticked?
Again, start with the end in mind. Make sure that the model is really clear. So, but when you talk about brands, let's not get confused, right? Because, there are brands out there that are franchise brands that endure well past the franchise. And often it's the franchisee's problem to get in and around, right? So that's a completely different consideration. If you're trying to exit a brand, there's a different consideration to if you're trying to exit a franchise or a small independent or whatever, right? Because typically that brand won't
fade in the deal, right?
Yeah, exactly. It'll just get sucked up by someone else, right? So I think you've got to start with what in your business model. What are the methodology that you can use to exit, and potentially the brand can continue to go well past that? And how do you put a value on a brand? But if we don't have that discussion, so I don't think there's many people that would be listening that have that issue, right?
But you're either selling internally or you're going to sell to an external.
Yeah, internal and external, or part thereof, or a combination of both, right? So I think we've certainly thought about how do you create enterprise value for an external sale on multiple levels, because you can create enterprise value well and above just your sales business or your property management business set up correctly. That said, typically most people will find that they're going to do some so they're going to merge with somebody, or they'll be acquired by somebody, or they're going to do internal succession. And we made a decision, we realised that it's pretty hard for people to get in and out of these things, as and when they want, because they're not that liquid. You sort of got this big event that you got to do, right? And so we actually took a different view. We looked at the model and went, that's sort of is dependent upon so many things out of our control. So we looked at saying, how do we have a partnership model across our entire business that allow people to actually invest and be partners and shareholders in the areas of the business where they have the biggest impact? And how do we give them a reason to do that by fractionalising costs and driving costs down and generating leads for them and all that sort of stuff? But equally, giving them the ability to be a shareholder in that space. But if they wanted to invest and diversify, they can actually invest across our entire network. So I've got shareholders who might have shareholdings in 4 or 5 of our offices across different marketplaces. And what that does, it's quite interesting, because when you start building up a number of shareholders, you can actually allow people to come in at much smaller numbers, much smaller amounts, than what you may otherwise be in other businesses, who are aspirational, who want to build into equity over time. And so in our business, it's sort of like we're creating a pool of investors, like almost our own private funding, if you want to call it that, that gives people flexibility on how to get in or out of their shares as and when they want to. Right?
I like that, shares as opposed to percentages.
Yeah, well, this is it, because that creates an interesting model, because we don't have to stress so much, because we can dial up and dial that down, and different people have different appetites at different times. So even for me, like, the goals I might have at the start of it is very different to where it might be towards the end of my career. I still want to have a small percentage in a business, but not be a majority owner. And in fact, I don't even have an attachment to being a majority owner in any of it, because it's how do we create pathways from a succession point of view for everybody to get what they want over time. So if you haven't thought about how does that work for you, it's really important that you do. Otherwise, you might find you get to the end of your journey and you just can't exit the way that you want. There's lots of moving parts. So I would say, if you've got the opportunity, start with the end in mind. And if you're in a position at the moment that you need to do a rethink, get some professional help.